you're Peter.
Yes, Peter Thomas.
Who comes after you?
I have a son called Timothy. I have 4 daughters apart from Timothy. Timothy has 2 sons.
And their names?
The eldest is called Paul James.
And the other?
And the other boy is called Joshua Daniel.
What's your relationship to him?
Great grandfather.
When were you aware of your ancestor?
About the age of 4, I suppose.
Really?
I was brought up on the legend. You know, my grandfather used to put me on his knee and tell me. Yeah, so it was Daniel Florence, then Carlos, and then another Daniel Florence, who was my grandfather.
Right.
And then Frank, my father.
And your father?
My father was Frank.
And your grandfather?
My grandfather was called Daniel Florence.
And his father?
His father was called, well, Carlos.
Carlos.
Over there, but when he got here, he became Charles.
Charles, right.
Yes. He was the son of Daniel Florence.
Carlos,
well,
okay.
one of the sons.
One of the sons, yeah.
He was the only son that left any descendants. But there were 1, 2, 3, 4, there were 5 sons. Okay. He had 5 sons and 5 daughters.
So Peter, okay. What happened to the eldest son, Simon Bolivar O'Leary?
He married a widow who had a couple of children before she married him. And they didn't have any children between them.
And he was the one responsible for editing Daniel Florence's memoirs.
In fact, I think he translated it.
And translated them from English into...
From English into Spanish, yes. A proper relationship between Cork City and Daniel Florence O'Leary was a native of Cork City, and he was very proud of his birth. And yet he's almost totally unknown today. The only connections that people see are a little plate which has almost disappeared from sight on the site of the old butter business, and the collections of books which we now have, luckily.
Okay, so Tighe's son was Florence, who was Daniel Florence's grandfather.
Yes.
And he went to Cork,
yes,
where he set up a butter business.
Butter business.
So tell me something about the Cork of that time.
Cork was still suffering from the fact that the city was where the merchants lived was on the island, which was not expandable, and it had 2 suburbs, Irish towns they were called. One to the south, which was generally known as Barrack Street, and it's where the Barrack Street area is now. And on the north side it was called Shandon, and that's where all the Catholics lived, and where Irish was spoken.
Okay.
Up to within the last 100 years. So the butter business was established in Barrack Street, and the building is still there, and has a plaque on it saying it was the birthplace of General Daniel Florence. It was very successful to start with because of the great wars that were on at the time. And the butter business was basically a way of marketing the butter from the individual farms. In those days, instead of having creameries, the butter was made on the farm, and then it was transported into the city to be exported, basically.
By horse?
On a pony, yes.
On a pony.
In a little firkin, a little barrel.
Right.
One on each side of the saddle.
Oh, okay.
And then the butter was graded and exported. They were exporting to the West Indies, to Portugal, but particularly provisioning the ships of the English Navy, which were lying off in the Atlantic, preventing the French and the Americans from getting together.
Okay.
For many years, right up until the Battle of Waterloo, which after the Battle of Waterloo, when peace was finally declared, not only did everybody start talking to each other again, but they no longer had any naval ships out in the Atlantic. Okay. So the business didn't totally collapse, but it went into decline.
And young Daniel Florence at that time would be a young man?
Yes, he was
experiencing,
born in 1801, so
sorry?
he'd be 14 at that time.
So he'd be experiencing the decline in the...
He didn't hang around for very long, because he set off to join Bolivar's army in... he started the exercise in 1816.
But why would he be attracted? Were there people, recruiters in the area, or...?
There were, yes, there were recruiters in London, and they did eventually come over to Dublin as well. But he was interested in a military life, and also he was a very good horseman. He wanted to join a cavalry regiment, and I think he had some genuine feeling for progress and freedom, which he couldn't express in Ireland at that time, except by doing something illegal. This was a legal outlet for him.
Just a question, was he able to speak Irish?
Oh yes.
How do you know that?
Because you couldn't exist in Barrack Street in those days without speaking Irish, and you certainly couldn't exist in the butter business, because that's all the people around here spoke Irish.
Okay.
But I've no direct evidence, of course, no.
And so...
And I know that his uncle, who was a Franciscan friar, used to preach in Irish.
In Cork?
In Cork.
And his studies, was he, would you say, was he from a well-to-do family, or just...
Who?
Daniel Florence?
Well, they were quite well off then.
Uh-huh.
But the background that I've described to you is one of somebody moving up the social scale.
So he would, when he joined, he was enlisted as a non-commissioned officer.
He was an ensign, which is the lowest form of rank in the army. It was described as a commission.
A commission, okay.
But it was a very low form indeed.
And from there he could advance.
Yes.
But he did advance very rapidly
He advanced very
when he was in South America.
Yes.
I mean, because of his skills.
He was an ensign when he got to Bolivar. They sailed up the Orinoco and met Bolivar at... it's now called something different. Yes.
Angostura.
Angostura, yes.
Now it's called Ciudad Bolivar.